There is a moment in every life when the comfortable road and the narrow road split apart. Most people never notice the fork. Some notice it and look away. And then there are the rare few, the ones history never forgets, who stop everything, stare down that narrow road into the darkness, and walk straight into it without looking back. This is the story of one of those men. Picture a stadium in England, sometime in the late 1870s. The crowd is enormous. Tens of thousands of people packed shoulder to shoulder under a grey British sky, all of them watching one man. He is tall, athletic, precise. A young man with the bearing of someone who has always known he was extraordinary. The ball leaves his hand with the quiet certainty of a master at work, and the crowd erupts. His name is on every newspaper in the country. Society women speak it at dinner parties. Young boys scratch it into wooden desks at school. Charles Thomas Studd is the greatest cricketer England has ever produced, and everyone knows it, including him. He has wealth that most people cannot imagine. His father, Edward Studd, made a fortune in India and came home to spend it lavishly. The Studd estate is magnificent. The horses, the servants, the social invitations, the prestige. It is all there, waiting for Charles like a throne prepared for a prince. And he is about to walk away from every last piece of it. Not because he failed, not because he was forced, not because the world rejected him. He walked away because something happened to him that changed the way he saw everything. And once you have seen what C.T. Studd saw, no stadium on earth is big enough to hold your heart. This is the story of a man who traded the loudest applause England had to offer for the silence of the Chinese interior, the heat of the Indian countryside, and the deep jungle of the African Congo. A man who gave away a fortune, buried his body on 3 continents, outlived his own health by decades of sheer will and faith, and died in a mud-walled room in the heart of Africa with almost nothing to his name and a smile on his face. This is the story of C.T. Studd. Charles Thomas Studd was born on December 2nd, 1860, into a world of extraordinary privilege. His father, Edward Studd, had spent years in India working for the British colonial enterprise and had returned to England a very wealthy man. Edward purchased a large estate in Tedworth, in the English county of Wiltshire, and settled into the life of a prosperous English gentleman, complete with racehorses, hunting parties, and all the trappings that Victorian wealth could provide. The Studd family had everything that Victorian England defined as success. There were servants for every task. There were horses that won races and brought home trophies. There was a social standing that opened every door in the county. And there were 3 sons, Kynaston, George, and Charles, who grew up understanding, without ever being told directly, that the world was a place arranged for men like them. Charles, the youngest of the 3, grew up in the shadow of that privilege and thrived inside it. He was gifted athletically from an early age, and as he moved through the English school system, first at private school, then at Eton, one of the most prestigious institutions in the country, his talent for cricket became impossible to ignore. Cricket in Victorian England was not simply a sport. It was a cultural institution. The greatest players were treated like national heroes, their names spoken in the same breath as military generals and members of parliament. And Charles Studd was becoming the greatest of them all. By the time he reached Cambridge University in 1879, his reputation was already enormous. But it was at Cambridge that the legend was fully born. He played for the Cambridge University cricket team with a brilliance that left opponents and spectators alike speechless. He was fast, precise, strategic, and devastating, a bowler and batsman of the highest order. The Cambridge team flourished around him, and the cricketing world of England could talk of little else. But something else was happening at Cambridge, quietly, underneath the roar of the crowds and the praise of the newspapers. Charles Studd's father, Edward, had undergone a dramatic spiritual transformation in 1877, just 2 years before Charles arrived at Cambridge. Edward had attended a series of evangelistic meetings held by the American preacher Dwight L. Moody, and the encounter had utterly changed him. Edward Studd was converted with a depth and sincerity that astonished everyone who knew him. The man who had lived for racehorses and social prestige suddenly became a man consumed by faith, by scripture, by prayer. He sold his racehorses. He opened his home for evangelistic meetings. He invited preachers. He spoke to his workers about Christ. And before he died in 1877, just months after his conversion, he had prayed intensely for the salvation of all 3 of his sons. Charles heard about his father's transformation. He watched it from a distance with a kind of polite curiosity, the respectful but disengaged attention of a young man who has other things on his mind. He was not hostile to faith. He simply had no use for it. He had cricket. He had Cambridge. He had a future so bright it was almost blinding. But the prayers of a dying father have a way of outlasting the distraction of earthly glory. It was in late 1882, Charles was 22 years old, that a letter arrived from his brother Kynaston. The letter was brief, but its content was enough to crack something open in Charles that would never fully close again. Kynaston told Charles that their brother George had been to a series of meetings held once again by Dwight L. Moody, and that George had been powerfully converted. The same faith that had transformed their father had now taken hold of their brother. Charles could not ignore it. Something in him recognized that this was no ordinary religious sentiment. He went to hear Moody preach. And in that meeting, listening to the American evangelist's plain, direct, unornamented proclamation of the gospel of Jesus Christ, Charles Thomas Studd, England's most celebrated young cricketer, heir to a fortune, idol of the nation, gave his life to God. He would later describe what happened in words that carry the weight of genuine transformation. He said that before his conversion, he had been living as though cricket and the world were everything. And after it, he said, "I knew that cricket would not last, and honor would not last, and nothing of this world would last, but that souls would last for eternity." It was not a gentle reshuffling of priorities. It was a revolution. The conversion of C.T. Studd did not immediately end his cricketing career. He continued to play, and he played brilliantly. In 1882, the very year of his conversion, he was selected to play for England in the historic Test series against Australia. The series that gave birth to the legend of the Ashes, perhaps the most famous rivalry in the history of cricket. He toured Australia. He played some of the finest cricket of his life. The world watched and applauded. But inside, something had shifted permanently. He played cricket now as a man who knows he is standing on temporary ground. Every match, every victory, every burst of applause from the stands felt slightly hollow. Not because it was meaningless, but because he had tasted something that made it all comparative. He had encountered the living God. He had read the words of Jesus Christ in the Gospel of Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 through 21. "Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." Those words were no longer abstract philosophy. They had become a personal challenge, a direct address. And Charles Studd was a man who did not know how to do anything halfway. He began to attend prayer meetings. He began to read scripture with the intensity he had previously devoted to cricket practice. He began to share his faith openly and without embarrassment, which was no small thing in Victorian England, where public religious enthusiasm was considered slightly indecent among the upper classes. He spoke at university meetings. He wrote letters. He prayed with his brothers. The transformation was visible to everyone around him, and not everyone was comfortable with it. Then, in 1884, everything accelerated. A message began to circulate in Cambridge that would alter the course of not just C.T. Studd's life, but the lives of 6 other young men alongside him, and ultimately the lives of thousands of people on the other side of the world. Hudson Taylor, the pioneering missionary to China and founder of the China Inland Mission, was speaking in Cambridge. Taylor was a man who had already given his life, his health, and his security to bring the gospel to the Chinese people. He had lived among them, dressed like them, learned their language, eaten their food, all in the radical conviction that God's call was to every nation, every people, every tongue. Taylor came to Cambridge not to impress anyone. He came with a simple, urgent appeal. China's millions were dying without Christ. Would anyone come? The message landed on Charles Studd's heart like a stone dropped into still water, and the ripples spread outward through everything. He had already been wrestling with the question of total surrender. He had already felt the growing tension between his comfortable English life and the radical demands of the faith he now held. And now, here was a man standing before him, not with a theological argument, but with a heartbeat, saying that people were dying, that the harvest was enormous, and that the workers were few. Charles Studd made his decision. He would go to China. He was not alone. 6 other young men from Cambridge made the same decision at the same time. They became known almost immediately as the Cambridge 7, and their decision sent shockwaves through English society. The newspapers, which had celebrated these young men as the future of English sport and society, could not understand it. Here were educated, talented, wealthy young men, men who had everything England could offer, choosing to leave it all behind for a foreign mission field that most English people considered dangerous, primitive, and completely unsuitable for gentlemen of their class. But the Cambridge 7 were not doing it for the approval of English society. They held a series of farewell meetings across England before their departure, and the impact was extraordinary. Students packed the halls to hear them speak. The sight of young men with everything to lose giving it all up for Christ struck something deep in the hearts of their generation. Hundreds of young people were inspired to consider their own faith, their own calling, their own willingness to surrender. C.T. Studd stood before those crowds and spoke with the blunt, cheerful certainty of a man who has settled something once and for all. He told them that he had come to understand the words of Jesus Christ in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 8, verse 36. For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? He told them he had gained a great deal of the world and that he had found it insufficient. He told them he was going to China because the call of God was worth more than all the applause of England. And then he went. Charles Studd arrived in China in 1885, at the age of 24. He threw himself into the work with characteristic total commitment. He learned Mandarin, he adopted Chinese dress. He traveled into the interior, into regions that few Westerners had ever seen. He preached. He prayed. He worked alongside Hudson Taylor and the other missionaries of the China Inland Mission with a wholehearted energy that impressed everyone around him. And then he did something that astonished everyone who heard about it. He gave away his entire inheritance. When Charles turned 25 in 1885, he came into full possession of the fortune his father had left him. It was a substantial sum, the equivalent today of perhaps several $100,000. And C.T. Studd gave it all away. He distributed it to mission organizations, to Christian workers, to the poor. He gave significant amounts to Dwight L. Moody for his work in America. He gave to George Muller's orphanages in England. He gave to other missionaries. He gave and gave until virtually nothing remained. One gift he kept back was a small amount that he gave directly to his new wife. He had met Priscilla Livingston Stewart, an Irish missionary, in China. They were married in 1888, and on their wedding day, Charles gave Priscilla the last remaining portion of his inheritance, a few £100. Priscilla, who had understood exactly who she was marrying, gave it all away immediately to another missionary organization. They were starting their life together with no money, no safety net, and no regrets. The years in China were years of deep joy and terrible difficulty in equal measure. Charles and Priscilla worked with devoted passion, but the Chinese climate and conditions were harsh, and Charles's health, never entirely robust, began to fail. He suffered repeated bouts of severe illness, including what appears to have been asthma and bronchitis that would follow him for the rest of his life. By the early 1890s, it was becoming clear that he could not continue in China. The doctors advised him to leave. It was, in the language of faith, a crisis of calling. He had come to China with the conviction that God had sent him there. Now the same body that God had made was apparently refusing to sustain the work. He was not yet 30 years old. He was ill. He had no money. He had a wife and growing family, and he was being told to go home. He went home to England, not in defeat, but in the quiet, sometimes agonizing trust of a man who believes that God sees what he cannot. There is so much more beneath the surface of this story. The letters Charles wrote from China, the prayers he and Priscilla offered in their small room in the middle of the night, the specific encounters with Chinese men and women whose lives were permanently changed by the gospel they brought, the struggles of faith that never made it into the newspaper reports, the moments of doubt, the moments of extraordinary peace. If you want to go deeper into the life of C.T. Studd, into the details, the history, the testimonies of those he touched, and the biblical principles that anchored his decisions, we have prepared a complete digital book about this story. You will find the link in the description below. Back in England, Charles and Priscilla spent several years recovering, speaking, and raising their 4 daughters. But Charles was not a man built for rest. He could not sit still while the world's need was as vast as he knew it to be. He prayed. He spoke at meetings. He stayed connected to mission organizations. And he waited, with the impatient, restless patience of a man who knows that God is not finished with him yet. In 1900, the call came again. This time, it was India. Charles went to the Telugu region of southern India, where a different kind of need was visible. Not the vast, unreached interior of China, but a different population, different language, different challenges. He worked there for 6 years, planting churches, preaching, and pouring himself out with the same totality of commitment that had marked everything he had ever done for God. India broke his health further. The climate, the work, the constant physical strain. By the time he returned to England again, Charles Studd was a man carrying a body that had been used hard and not cared for gently. His doctors were blunt. He was not well. He could not continue in tropical climates. The physical limitations seemed, from every human angle, to represent the final word on his missionary career. He was 50 years old, and God was not finished. In 1908, Charles Studd attended a meeting where a speaker made a comment that ignited everything in him again. The speaker mentioned, almost in passing, that there was a vast region of Central Africa, what was then known as the Belgian Congo and the surrounding territories, where millions of people lived in the darkness of spiritual need, without a single missionary to reach them. The comment was not intended as a personal summons. It was a general observation. C.T. Studd received it as a direct order from God. His response became one of the most quoted statements in the history of Christian missions. He said, "Some want to live within the sound of church or chapel bell. I want to run a rescue shop within a yard of hell." He was 50 years old. He was ill. His doctors told him that going to Africa would kill him. His supporters urged caution. Some of his closest friends questioned his judgment. His wife Priscilla, whose own health was in serious decline, could not accompany him. None of it stopped him. In 1910, C.T. Studd traveled to Africa to scout the need. What he found in the interior of the continent confirmed everything he had felt. There were people who had never once heard the name of Jesus Christ. There were villages stretching across hundreds of miles of jungle and savanna where no missionary had ever walked. The need was not abstract. It had faces. It had names. It had children being born into a world that had never heard the words of the Gospel of John, chapter 3, verse 16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have eternal life. He could not go home. He wrote to Priscilla. He wrote to the mission organizations. He told them he was staying. He began the work of establishing what would become the Heart of Africa Mission, later known as the Worldwide Evangelization Crusade, and later still as WEC International, one of the most significant interdenominational mission organizations of the 20th century. The years that followed were the most grueling of his life. The African interior was no place for a sick man in his 50s. The heat was brutal. The distances were enormous. Disease was constant. The logistics of establishing mission stations in remote regions with no infrastructure, no supply lines, no communication networks required a combination of physical endurance, organizational creativity, and sheer stubbornness that would have broken most healthy young men. Charles Studd had none of the advantages of youth or health. He had faith, and he had the absolute, unshakable conviction that God had put him exactly where he was supposed to be. He recruited other missionaries. He trained local workers. He traveled on foot and by canoe into regions that had never seen a European face. He preached through interpreters. He baptized converts. He established stations that became permanent centers of Christian community. He wrote letters home, long, detailed, passionate letters filled with accounts of changed lives, of people hearing the gospel for the first time, of men and women weeping with a joy they had never felt before because they had encountered the truth of the living Christ. But the opposition was fierce, not only from the physical environment. The mission work began to generate controversy within the Christian community itself. Some mission organizations questioned Studd's methods. Some questioned his theology. Some questioned his physical and mental stability. As he aged and his health deteriorated, he became at times difficult to work with, stubborn, demanding, intense to the point of inflexibility. Some of the missionaries who came to work alongside him found him overwhelming. Some left. He acknowledged his own faults. In his letters, he was brutally honest about his failings as a leader and a human being. He knew he was not easy. He knew his methods were unconventional, but he also knew what he had seen in the jungle: men and women coming to Christ for the first time, villages transformed, lives rebuilt around the gospel, and he could not bring himself to moderate his urgency. His wife Priscilla remained in England throughout most of these years, supporting the mission from home, raising funds, corresponding with supporters, managing the organizational side of the work. They communicated by letters that took weeks to arrive. Their partnership was real, but conducted across thousands of miles of ocean and jungle. Priscilla was as committed to the mission as he was, even as her own health declined steadily. She died in 1929. Charles received the news in Africa. He was 68 years old, ill, exhausted, and alone in the interior of the continent. He wept. He grieved. He wrote about her with a tenderness that breaks the heart of anyone who reads it. And then he kept working, because stopping was the one thing he did not know how to do. In his final years, Charles Studd became something almost mythological to the people around him. He was clearly dying. He was suffering from what is now believed to have been a combination of malaria, gallstones, and the cumulative physical damage of decades of missionary life in harsh conditions. He refused to leave Africa. He refused to reduce his activity significantly. Visitors who came to the mission station found a gaunt, frail old man who still rose before dawn to pray, who still met with the local workers, who still wrote letters and planned for the future of the mission as though he expected to be there to see it through. He had a clarity about eternity that made physical suffering seem, to him, almost beside the point. He wrote in his journal, "If Jesus Christ be God and died for me, then no sacrifice can be too great for me to make for him." He had first written those words as a young man. He was living them out as an old one, and the distance between the writing and the living was the distance of an entire life poured out in service. Charles Thomas Studd died on July 16, 1931, in Ibambi, in what is now the Democratic Republic of Congo. He was 70 years old. He had been in Africa for more than 2 decades. He died in the field, surrounded by the African missionaries and workers he had trained and loved, having never compromised his call and never once, by any credible account, expressed regret for the choices he had made. At his death, the Heart of Africa mission he had founded encompassed mission stations across Central Africa, hundreds of converted believers, local churches with local leadership, and a network of workers who would carry the work forward long after he was gone. The organization he founded, WEC International, continues today, operating in dozens of countries around the world, with thousands of missionaries carrying the gospel to unreached peoples on every continent. It is difficult to sit with the story of C.T. Studd and not feel the weight of what he chose. We live in a world that is very good at telling us what we deserve, what comfort we are owed, what recognition we have earned, what rest we are entitled to. We are surrounded by messages, spoken and unspoken, that say, protect yourself, preserve yourself, choose the option that costs you less. C.T. Studd heard those messages. He was not untouched by the pull of comfort, the appeal of safety, the logic of self-preservation. He was a human being, and he knew what it felt like to be warm and well-fed and admired. He knew what it felt like to stand in a stadium while thousands of people applauded him. And he knew what it felt like to stand in the jungle, sick and alone, with everything spent, and still feel more alive than he had ever felt on any cricket field in England. He found in Jesus Christ what the world at its loudest cannot provide. He found a love that did not depend on his performance. He found a calling that outlasted his health, his youth, his money, and his reputation. He found that the words of the Apostle Paul, written in the letter to the Philippians, chapter 4, verse 13, were literally, physically, demonstrably true. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. Not metaphorically, not as inspiration for a difficult afternoon. As the operational reality of a life poured out over decades in China, in India, and in the heart of Africa. The stadiums that once roared his name are long gone. The matches he played are footnotes in cricket history books that fewer people read each year. But the mission he founded is still running. The churches he planted are still standing. The people who came to Christ through his work, and their children, and their children's children, are numbered in the thousands. That is the arithmetic of eternity. That is the return on the investment C.T. Studd made when he was 22 years old and sat in a meeting hall listening to Dwight L. Moody talk about souls that would last forever. If this story has stirred something in you, if the courage, the sacrifice, the total surrender of C.T. Studd has moved your heart, we invite you to go deeper. We have prepared a complete digital book about the life of C.T. Studd. Inside, you will find more details about his years in China and India, the historical context of the missionary movement he was part of, the letters he wrote to Priscilla from the African jungle, biblical reflections drawn from the passages that shaped his life, lessons from his story that speak directly to the challenges of faith today, and a final prayer. And by getting this book, you are not only investing in your own walk with God, you are also helping this work continue, so that more stories of faith, sacrifice, and love for Christ can reach people who need them. The link is in the description below. And if this story touched your heart today, if the life of C.T. Studd reminded you that faith is not a comfortable theory, but a living, demanding, magnificent reality, please like this video so it can reach more people who need to hear it. Subscribe to this channel for more true stories of missionaries, martyrs, and servants of God who gave everything for the name of Christ. Comment below and tell us where in the world you're watching from. We love knowing that these stories are traveling to every corner of the earth. And share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that the call of God is worth more than anything this world has to offer, and that a life surrendered to Christ is the most extraordinary life a human being can live. If this story moved you, leave a like. It costs you nothing. But it helps this story reach someone who needs it. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and leave a comment below. Tell me what you thought, and where in the world you're watching from. I'd love to know. God bless you. See you in the next story.